The Sign of 4 by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes took his bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece, and his hypodermic syringe from its neat morocco case. With his long, white, nervous fingers, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. He thrust the sharp point home, pressed down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. 3 times a day for many months I had witnessed this performance, but custom had not reconciled my mind to it. On the contrary, from day to day I had become more irritable at the sight. "Which is it today?" I asked. "Morphine or cocaine?" "It is cocaine," he said. "A 7% solution. Would you care to try it?" "No, indeed," I answered. "My constitution has not got over the Afghan campaign yet. I cannot afford to throw any extra strain upon it." "Perhaps you're right, Watson," he said. "I suppose that its influence is physically a bad one. I find it, however, so transcendently stimulating and clarifying to the mind that its secondary action is a matter of small moment." "But consider," I said. "Count the cost. Why should you, for a mere passing pleasure, risk the loss of those great powers with which you have been endowed?" "My mind," he said, "rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, and I am in my proper atmosphere. That is why I have chosen my own particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world." "The only unofficial detective?" I said, raising my eyebrows. "The only unofficial consulting detective," he answered. "I am the last and highest court of appeal in detection. When Lestrade or Athelney Jones are out of their depth, the matter is laid before me. I examine the data as an expert and pronounce a specialist's opinion. I claim no credit in such cases. My name figures in no newspaper. The work itself, the pleasure of finding a field for my peculiar powers, is my highest reward." "May I ask whether you have any professional inquiry on foot at present?" "None. Hence the cocaine. I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for?" I had opened my mouth to reply when, with a crisp knock, our landlady entered, bearing a card upon a brass salver. "A young lady for you, sir," she said, addressing my companion. "Miss Mary Morstan," he read. "I have no recollection of the name." "Ask the young lady to step up, Mrs. Hudson. Don't go, Doctor. I should prefer that you remain." Miss Morstan entered the room with a firm step and an outward composure of manner. She was a blonde young lady, small, dainty, well-gloved, and dressed in the most perfect taste. There was, however, a plainness and simplicity about her costume which bore with it a suggestion of limited means. Her expression was sweet and amiable, and her large blue eyes were singularly spiritual and sympathetic. I could not but observe, however, that as she took the seat which Sherlock Holmes placed for her, her lip trembled, her hand quivered, and she showed every sign of intense inward agitation. "I have come to you, Mr. Holmes," she said, "because you once enabled my employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester, to unravel a little domestic complication." "Mrs. Cecil Forrester," he repeated. "The case, as I remember it, was a very simple one." "She did not think so. But at least you cannot say the same of mine. I can hardly imagine anything more strange, more utterly inexplicable, than the situation in which I find myself." Holmes rubbed his hands, and his eyes glistened. "State your case," said he. I felt that my position was an embarrassing one. You will, I am sure, excuse me," I said, rising from my chair. To my surprise, the young lady held up her gloved hand to detain me. "If your friend," she said, "would be good enough to stop, he might be of inestimable service to me." I relapsed into my chair. "Briefly," she continued, "the facts are these. My father was an officer in an Indian regiment who sent me home when I was quite a child. My mother was dead, and I had no relative in England. I was placed, however, in a comfortable boarding establishment at Edinburgh, and there I remained until I was 17 years of age. In the year 1878, my father, who was senior captain of his regiment, obtained 12 months' leave and came home. He telegraphed to me from London that he had arrived, all safe, and directed me to come down at once, giving the Langham Hotel as his address. On reaching London, I drove to the Langham and was informed that Captain Morstan was staying there, but that he had gone out the night before and had not returned. I waited all day without news of him. That night I communicated with the police, and next morning we advertised in all the papers. Our inquiries led to no result, and from that day to this, no word has ever been heard of my unfortunate father. "The date?" asked Holmes, opening his notebook. He disappeared upon the 3rd of December, 1878, nearly 10 years ago. "His luggage?" "Remained at the hotel. There was nothing in it to suggest a clue. Some clothes, some books, and a considerable number of curiosities from the Andaman Islands. He had been one of the officers in charge of the convict guard there." "Had he any friends in town?" "Only one that we know of. Major Sholto, of his own regiment, the 34th Bombay Infantry. The major had retired some little time before and lived at Upper Norwood. We communicated with him, of course, but he did not even know that his brother officer was in England." "A singular case," remarked Holmes. I have not yet described to you the most singular part. About 6 years ago, to be exact, upon the 4th of May, 1882, an advertisement appeared in the Times asking for the address of Miss Mary Morstan. There was no name or address appended. I had at that time just entered the family of Mrs. Cecil Forrester in the capacity of governess. By her advice I published my address in the advertisement column. The same day there arrived through the post a small cardboard box addressed to me, which I found to contain a very large and lustrous pearl. No word of writing was enclosed. Since then, every year upon the same date, there has always appeared a similar box containing a similar pearl, without any clue as to the sender. They have been pronounced by an expert to be of a rare variety and of considerable value. You can see for yourself that they are very handsome." She opened the flat box as she spoke, and showed me 6 of the finest pearls that I had ever seen. "Your statement is most interesting," said Sherlock Holmes. "Has anything else occurred to you?" "Yes, and no later than today. That is why I have come to you. This morning I received this letter, which you will perhaps read for yourself." "Thank you," said Holmes. "The envelope too, please." "Postmarked London, S.W. Date, July 7th. Man's thumb mark on corner. Probably postman. Best quality paper. Particular man in his stationery. No address. Be at the 3rd pillar from the left outside the Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends. You are a wronged woman and shall have justice. Do not bring police. If you do, all will be in vain. Your unknown friend. Well, really, this is a very pretty little mystery. And what do you intend to do, Miss Morstan? That is exactly what I want to ask you. Then we shall most certainly go, you and I, and, yes, why, Dr. Watson is the very man. He and I have worked together before. But would he come? She asked, with something appealing in her voice and expression. I shall be very proud and happy, I said, if I can be of any service. Oh, you are both very kind. If I'm here at 6, it will do, I suppose. You must not be later, said Holmes. There is one other point, however. Is this handwriting the same as that upon the pearl box addresses? I have them here, she answered, producing 6 pieces of paper. You are certainly a model client. Let us see now. He spread out the papers upon the table and gave little darting glances from one to the other. They are undoubtedly by the same person. I should not like to suggest false hopes, Miss Morstan, but is there any resemblance between this hand and that of your father? "Oh, nothing could be more unlike." "I expected to hear you say so. We shall look out for you then at 6. Au revoir." "Au revoir," said our visitor, and with a bright, kindly glance from one to the other of us, she hurried away. Standing at the window, I watched her walking briskly down the street. "What a very attractive woman," I exclaimed, turning to my companion. "Is she?" he said. "I did not observe." "You really are an automaton, a calculating machine," I cried. He smiled gently. "It is of the first importance not to allow your judgment to be biased by personal qualities. Now I'm going out. I have some few references to make. I shall be back in an hour." I sat in the window, and my mind ran upon our late visitor. Her smiles, the deep, rich tones of her voice, the strange mystery which overhung her life. If she was 17 at the time of her father's disappearance, she must be 27 now. A sweet age, when youth has lost its self-consciousness and become a little sobered by experience. So I sat and mused until such dangerous thoughts came into my head that I hurried away to my desk and plunged furiously into the latest treatise upon pathology. It was 5:30 before Holmes returned. He was bright, eager, and in excellent spirits. "There is no great mystery in this matter," he said, taking the cup of tea which I had poured out for him. "The facts appear to admit of only one explanation." "What? You've solved it already?" "Well, that would be too much to say. I have discovered a suggestive fact, that is all. It is, however, very suggestive. Major Sholto died upon the 28th of April, 1882. "I may be very obtuse, Holmes, but I fail to see what this suggests." "No? You surprise me. Look at it this way, then. Captain Morstan disappears. The only person in London whom he could have visited is Major Sholto. Major Sholto denies having heard that he was in London. 4 years later, Sholto dies. Within a week of his death, Captain Morstan's daughter receives a valuable present, which is repeated from year to year, and now culminates in a letter which describes her as a wronged woman. What wrong can it refer to, except this deprivation of her father? And why should the presents begin immediately after Sholto's death, unless it is that Sholto's heir knows something of the mystery and desires to make compensation? Have you any alternative theory which will meet the facts?" But what a strange compensation, and how strangely made. Why, too, should he write a letter now rather than 6 years ago? Again, the letter speaks of giving her justice. What justice can she have? It is too much to suppose that her father is still alive. "There are certain difficulties," said Sherlock Holmes, "but our expedition of tonight will solve them all. Here is a four-wheeler, and Miss Morstan is inside. Are you all ready? Then we'd better go down, for it is a little past the hour." Miss Morstan was muffled in a dark cloak, and her sensitive face was composed but pale. She readily answered the few additional questions which Sherlock Holmes put to her. "Major Sholto was a very particular friend of Papa's," she said. "His letters were full of allusions to the Major. By the way, a curious paper was found in Papa's desk which no one could understand. I thought you might care to see it, so I brought it with me. It is here." Holmes unfolded the paper carefully and smoothed it out upon his knee. He then very methodically examined it all over with his double lens. "It is paper of native Indian manufacture. It has at some time been pinned to a board. The diagram upon it appears to be a plan of part of a large building with numerous halls, corridors, and passages. At one point is a small cross done in red ink, and above it is 337 from left in faded pencil writing. In the left-hand corner is a curious hieroglyphic like 4 crosses in a line with their arms touching. Beside it is written in very rough and coarse characters, the sign of the 4, Jonathan Small, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, Dost Akbar. No, I confess that I do not see how this bears upon the matter, yet it is evidently a document of importance. It has been kept carefully in a pocket-book, for the one side is as clean as the other. It was in his pocket-book that we found it. Preserve it carefully then, Miss Morstan, for it may prove to be of use to us. I begin to suspect that this matter may turn out to be much deeper and more subtle than I had first supposed. I must reconsider my ideas. He leaned back in the cab, but I could see by his drawn brow and his vacant eye that he was thinking intently. Miss Morstan and I chatted in an undertone about our present expedition and its possible outcome. At the Lyceum Theatre, the crowds were already thick at the side entrances. We had hardly reached the third pillar, which was our rendezvous, before a small, dark, brisk man in the dress of a coachman accosted us. "Are you the parties who come with Miss Morstan?" he asked. "I am Miss Morstan, and these two gentlemen are my friends," said she. You will excuse me, miss," he said with a certain dogged manner, "but I was to ask you to give me your word that neither of your companions is a police officer." "I give you my word on that," she answered. He gave a shrill whistle, on which a street Arab led across a four-wheeler and opened the door. The man who had addressed us mounted to the box, while we took our places inside. We plunged away at a furious pace through the foggy streets. At first I had some idea as to the direction in which we were driving, but soon, what with our pace, the fog, and my own limited knowledge of London, I lost my bearings and knew nothing save that we seemed to be going a very long way. Sherlock Holmes was never at fault, however, and he muttered the names as the cab rattled through squares and in and out of tortuous by-streets. "Our quest does not appear to take us to very fashionable regions," he said. We had indeed reached a questionable and forbidding neighbourhood, interminable lines of new, staring brick buildings, and at last the cab drew up at the third house in a new terrace. None of the other houses were inhabited, and that at which we stopped was as dark as its neighbours, save for a single glimmer in the kitchen window. On our knocking, however, the door was instantly thrown open by a Hindu servant. "The Sahib awaits you," he said, and even as he spoke there came a high-piping voice from some inner room. "Show them straight into me." We followed the Indian down a sordid and common passage, ill-lit and worse furnished, until he came to a door upon the right, which he threw open. A blaze of yellow light streamed out upon us, and in the centre of the glare there stood a small man with a very high head, a bristle of red hair all around the fringe of it, and a bald, shining scalp, which shot out from among it like a mountain peak from fir trees. "Your servant, Miss Morstan," he said. "Your servant, gentlemen. Pray step into my little sanctum." We were all astonished by the appearance of the apartment. The richest and glossiest of curtains draped the walls, and the carpet was of amber and black, so soft and so thick. A huge hooker stood upon a mat in the corner of the room. "Mr. Thaddeus Sholto," said the little man. "That is my name. You are Miss Morstan, of course, and these gentlemen—" "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson." "A doctor, eh?" cried he, much excited. "Have you your stethoscope? Might I ask, would you have the kindness? I have grave doubts about my mitral valve." I listened to his heart. "Well, it appears to be normal," I said. "You will excuse my anxiety, Miss Morstan," he remarked airily. "I have long had suspicions as to that valve. I am delighted to hear that they are unwarranted. Had your father, Miss Morstan, refrained from throwing a strain upon his heart, he might have been alive now." I could have struck the man across the face, so hot was I at this callous and off-hand reference to so delicate a matter. Miss Morstan sat down, and her face grew white to the lips. "I knew in my heart that he was dead," said she. "I can give you every information," said he. "And what is more, I can do you justice, and I will too, whatever Brother Bartholomew may say. I am so glad to have your friends here, not only as an escort to you, but also as witnesses to what I am about to do and say." "Whatever you may choose to tell us will go no further," said Holmes. I nodded to show my agreement. "That is well," said he.
"May I offer you a glass of Chianti, Miss Morstan?" "No?" "Well, then. When I first determined to make this communication to you, I took the liberty of making an appointment in such a way that my man Williams might be able to see you first. He had orders, if he were dissatisfied, to proceed no further in the matter. You will excuse these precautions, but I am a man of somewhat retiring, and I might even say refined tastes, and there is nothing more unaesthetic than a policeman. I live, as you see, with some little atmosphere of elegance around me."
"You will excuse me, Mr. Sholto," said Miss Morstan, "but I am here at your request to learn something which you desire to tell me. It is very late, and I should desire the interview to be as short as possible."
"At the best it must take some time," he answered, "for we shall certainly have to go to Norwood and see Brother Bartholomew. He is very angry with me for taking the course which seemed right to me. I had quite high words with him last night."
"If we are to go to Norwood, it would perhaps be as well to start at once," I ventured to remark.
"Oh, that would hardly do," he cried. "No, I must prepare you by showing you how we all stand to each other. I must tell you that there are several points in the story of which I myself am ignorant. I can only lay the facts before you as far as I know them myself. My father was, as you may have guessed, Major John Sholto, once of the Indian Army. He retired some 11 years ago, and came to live at Pondicherry Lodge in Upper Norwood. He had prospered in India, and brought back with him a considerable sum of money, a large collection of valuable curiosities, and a staff of native servants. My twin brother Bartholomew and I were the only children. I can very well remember the sensation which was caused by the disappearance of Captain Morstan. Father used to join in our speculations as to what could have happened. Never for an instant did we suspect that he had the whole secret hidden in his own breast, that of all men he alone knew the fate of Arthur Morstan. We did know, however, that some mystery, some positive danger, overhung our father. He was very fearful of going out alone, and he had a marked aversion to men with wooden legs. On one occasion he actually fired his revolver at a wooden-legged man, who proved to be a harmless tradesman canvassing for orders. Early in 1882, my father received a letter from India which was a great shock to him. He nearly fainted at the breakfast table when he opened it, and from that day he sickened to his death. What was in the letter we could never discover, but I could see, as he held it, that it was short and written in his scrawling hand. Towards the end of April we were informed that he was beyond all hope, and that he wished to make a last communication to us. When we entered his room, he was propped up with pillows and breathing heavily. I have only one thing," he said, "which weighs upon my mind at this supreme moment. It is my treatment of poor Morstan's orphan. The cursed greed which has been my besetting sin through life has withheld from her the treasure, half at least of which should have been hers. See that chaplet tipped with pearls beside the quinine bottle? Even that I could not bear to part with, although I had got it out with the design of sending it to her. You, my sons, will give her a fair share of the Agra treasure, but send her nothing, not even the chaplet, until I am gone. I will tell you how Morstan died," he continued. "He had suffered for years from a weak heart, but he concealed it from everyone. I alone knew it. When, in India, he and I, through a remarkable chain of circumstances, came into possession of a considerable treasure, I brought it over to England, and on the night of Morstan's arrival, he came straight over here to claim his share. We had a difference of opinion as to the division of the treasure, and we came to heated words. Morstan had sprung out of his chair in a paroxysm of anger, when he suddenly pressed his hand to his side. His face turned a dusky hue, and he fell backward, cutting his head against the corner of the treasure chest. When I stooped over him, I found, to my horror, that he was dead. For a long time I sat half distracted, wondering what I should do. My first impulse was, of course, to call for assistance, but I could not but recognize that there was every chance that I would be accused of his murder. Again, an official inquiry could not be made without bringing out some facts about the treasure, which I was particularly anxious to keep secret. I was still pondering over the matter when, looking up, I saw my servant, Lal Chowder, in the doorway. "Do not fear, Sahib," he said. "No one need know that you have killed him. Let us hide him away, and who is the wiser?" That was enough to decide me. If my own servant could not believe my innocence, how could I hope to make it good before 12 foolish tradesmen in a jury box? Lal Chowder and I disposed of the body that night. My fault lies in the fact that we concealed not only the body but also the treasure, and that I have clung to Morstan's share as well as my own. I wish you, therefore, to make restitution. Put your ears to my mouth. The treasure is hidden. At this instant, a horrible change came over his expression. His eyes stared wildly, his jaw dropped, and he yelled in a voice which I can never forget, "Keep him out! For Christ's sake, keep him out!" We both stared round at the window behind us upon which his gaze was fixed. A face was looking in at us out of the darkness. It was a bearded, hairy face, with wild, cruel eyes, and an expression of concentrated malevolence. My brother and I rushed towards the window, but the man was gone. When we returned to my father, his head had dropped, and his pulse had ceased to beat. We searched the garden that night, but found no sign of the intruder, save that just under the window a single footmark was visible in the flower bed. We soon, however, had another and a more striking proof that there were secret agencies at work all round us. The window of my father's room was found open in the morning. His cupboards and boxes had been rifled, and upon his chest was fixed a torn piece of paper with the words, "The sign of the Four," scrawled across it. What the phrase meant, or who our secret visitor may have been, we never knew. The little man stopped to light his hookah, and puffed thoughtfully for a few moments. "My brother and I," he continued, "were, as you may imagine, much excited as to the treasure which my father had spoken of. For weeks and months we dug and delved in every part of the garden without discovering its whereabouts. We could judge the splendour of the missing riches by the chaplet which he had taken out. Over this chaplet my brother Bartholomew and I had some little discussion. It was all that I could do to persuade him to let me find out Miss Morstan's address and send her a detached pearl at fixed intervals, so that at least she might never feel destitute." "It was a kindly thought," said our companion. "It was extremely good of you." The little man waved his hand deprecatingly. "We were your trustees," he said. "That was the view which I took of it, though Brother Bartholomew could not altogether see it in that light. Yesterday, however, I learnt that the treasure has been discovered. I instantly communicated with Miss Morstan, and it only remains for us to drive out to Norwood and demand our share. I explained my views last night to Brother Bartholomew, so we shall be expected, if not welcome, visitors."
Our cab was awaiting us outside, and our programme was evidently prearranged,
for the driver started off at once at a rapid pace. Thaddeus Sholto talked incessantly.
"Bartholomew is a clever fellow," said he. "How do you think he found out where the treasure was? He had come to the conclusion that it was somewhere indoors. So he worked out all the cubic space of the house. He found that the height of the building was 74 feet, but on adding together the heights of all the separate rooms, and making allowance for the space between, he could not bring the total to more than 70 feet. There were 4 feet unaccounted for. These could only be at the top of the building. He knocked a hole, therefore, in the lath and plaster ceiling of the highest room, and there, sure enough, he came upon another little garret above it, which had been sealed up and was known to no one. In the centre stood the treasure chest, resting upon 2 rafters. He lowered it through the hole, and there it lies. He computes the value of the jewels at not less than 500,000 sterling.
At the mention of this gigantic sum, we all stared at one another open-eyed. Miss Morstan, could we secure her rights, would change from a needy governess to the richest heiress in England. Surely it was the place of a loyal friend to rejoice at such news. Yet I am ashamed to say that selfishness took me by the soul, and that my heart turned as heavy as lead within me. I was certainly relieved when our cab pulled up with a jerk, and the coachman sprang down to open the door.
"This, Miss Morstan, is Pondicherry Lodge," said Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, as he handed her out.
It was nearly 11 o'clock when we reached this final stage of our night's ventures. Pondicherry Lodge stood in its own grounds, and a single iron-clamped door formed the only means of entrance. Thaddeus Sholto knocked with a peculiar postman-like rat-tat.
"Who is there?"
cried a voice from within.
"It is I, McMurdo. You surely know my knock by this time."
The door swung heavily back, and a short, deep-chested man stood in the opening.
"Is that you, Mr. Thaddeus?" "Oh, but who are the others? I had no orders about them."
"No, McMurdo? You surprise me. I told my brother last night that I should bring some friends."
"Oh, he ain't been out of his rooms today, Mr. Thaddeus, and I have no orders. I can let you in, but I don't know none of your friends."
"Oh, yes, you do, McMurdo," cried Sherlock Holmes. "I don't think you can have forgotten me. Don't you remember that amateur who fought 3 rounds with you at Allison's rooms on the night of your benefit 4 years back?"
"Not Mr. Sherlock Holmes. God's truth, how could I have mistook you? Oh, in you come, sir, in you come, you and your friends," he said.
Inside, a gravel path wound through desolate grounds to a huge clump of a house, square and prosaic. Thaddeus Sholto seemed ill at ease.
"I cannot understand it," he said. "There must be some mistake. I distinctly told Bartholomew that we should be here, and yet there is no light in his window." "Does he always guard the premises in this way?" asked Holmes. "Yes, he has followed my father's custom. That is Bartholomew's window up there, where the moonshine strikes. It is quite bright, but there is no light from within, I think." "None," said Holmes. "But I see the glint of a light in that little window beside the door." "Ah, that is the housekeeper's room. That is where old Mrs. Bernstone sits. She can tell us all about it. But hush! What is that?"
From the great black house there sounded through the silent night the saddest and most pitiful of sounds, the shrill, broken whimpering of a frightened woman.
"It is Mrs. Bernstone," said Sholto. "She is the only woman in the house. Wait here. I shall be back in a moment."
He had left us the lantern, and Holmes swung it slowly round, and peered keenly at the house and at the great rubbish heaps which cumbered the grounds. Miss Morstan and I stood together, and her hand was in mine. A wondrous, subtle thing is love, for here were we two who had never seen each other before that day, between whom no word or even look of affection had ever passed, and yet now, in an hour of trouble, Our hands instinctively sought for each other. "What a strange place," she said, looking round. "It looks as though all the moles in England had been let loose in it." "These are the traces of the treasure-seekers," said Holmes. At that moment the door of the house burst open, and Thaddeus Sholto came running out. "There is something amiss with Bartholomew," he cried. "Come into the house," said Holmes. "Yes, do," pleaded Thaddeus Sholto. We all followed him into the housekeeper's room. The old woman was pacing up and down. "Master has locked himself in, and will not answer me," she explained. "An hour ago I feared that something was amiss, so I went up and peeped through the keyhole. Oh, you must go up, Mr. Thaddeus. I've seen Mr. Bartholomew in joy and sorrow for 10 years, but I never saw him with such a face on him as that." Sherlock Holmes took the lamp and led the way. Miss Morstan remained with the housekeeper. Twice, as we ascended, he whipped his lens out of his pocket and carefully examined marks which appeared to me to be mere shapeless smudges of dust upon the coconut matting which served as a stair-carpet. The third flight of stairs ended in a straight passage of some length, and with 3 doors upon the left. The third door was that which we were seeking. Holmes knocked, without receiving any answer, and then tried to turn the handle and force it open. It was locked on the inside. The key being turned, however, the hole was not entirely closed. Sherlock Holmes bent down to it, and instantly rose again, with a sharp intaking of the breath. "There is something devilish in this, Watson," said he. "What do you make of it?" I stooped to the hole, and recoiled in horror. Moonlight was streaming into the room. Looking straight at me, and suspended, as it were, in the air, for all beneath was in shadow, there hung a face. The features were set in a horrible smile, a fixed and unnatural grin, which, in that still and moonlit room, was more jarring to the nerves than any scowl or contortion. "This is terrible," I said to Holmes. "What is to be done?" "The door must come down," he answered. Together we flung ourselves upon it, and it gave way with a sudden snap. We found ourselves within Bartholomew Sholto's chamber. It appeared to have been fitted up as a chemical laboratory. In the corners stood carboys of acid in wicker baskets. One of these appeared to leak, or to have been broken, for a stream of dark-coloured liquid had trickled out from it, and the air was heavy with a peculiarly pungent, tar-like odour. A set of steps stood at one side of the room, and above them there was an opening in the ceiling large enough for a man to pass through. At the foot of the steps a long coil of rope was thrown carelessly together. By the table, in a wooden armchair, the master of the house was seated all in a heap. He was stiff and cold, and had clearly been dead for many hours. By his hand upon the table there lay a peculiar instrument, a brown, close-grained stick, with a stone head like a hammer, rudely lashed on with coarse twine. Beside it was a torn sheet of notepaper with some words scrawled upon it. Holmes glanced at it, and then handed it to me. "You see," he said, with a significant raising of the eyebrows. In the light of the lantern I read with a thrill of horror, "The sign of the Four." "What in God's name, what does it all mean?" I asked. "It means murder," said he, stooping over the dead man. "Ah, I expected it. Look here." He pointed to what looked like a long, dark thorn stuck in the skin just above the ear. "It looks like a thorn," said I. "It is a thorn. You may pick it out, but be careful, for it is poisoned." It came away from the skin so readily that hardly any mark was left behind. "This is all an insoluble mystery to me," I said. "It grows darker instead of clearer." "On the contrary," Holmes answered, "it clears every instant. I only require a few missing links to have an entirely connected case." We had almost forgotten our companion's presence since we entered the chamber. He was still standing in the doorway. Suddenly he broke out into a sharp, querulous cry. "The treasure is gone," he said. "They have robbed him of the treasure. There is the hole through which we lowered it. I helped him to do it. I was the last person who saw him. I left him here last night, and I heard him lock the door as I came downstairs." "What time was that?" "It was 10 o'clock. And now he is dead, and the police will be called in, and I shall be suspected of having had a hand in it." "You have no reason for fear, Mr. Sholto," said Holmes. "Take my advice and drive down to the station to report the matter to the police. We shall wait here until your return." The little man obeyed in a half-stupefied fashion, and we heard him stumbling down the stairs in the dark. "Now, Watson," said Holmes, rubbing his hands, "we have half an hour to ourselves. Let us make good use of it. Simple as the case seems now, there may be something deeper underlying it." "Simple?" I ejaculated. "Surely," he said. "In the first place, how did these folk come, and how did they go? The door has not been opened since last night. The window is snibbed on the inner side. Framework is solid. No hinges at the side. Let us open it. No water pipe near. Roof quite out of reach. Yet a man has mounted by the window. It rained a little last night. Here is the print of a foot in mould upon the sill. And here is a circular muddy mark. And here again upon the floor. And here again by the table." "What, that is not a footmark," said I. "It is the impression of a wooden stump." "It is the wooden-legged man." "Quite so. But there has been someone else, a very able and efficient ally. Could you scale that wall, Doctor?" I looked out of the open window. We were a good 60 feet from the ground, and look where I would, I could see no foothold. "What, it is absolutely impossible," I answered. "Without aid it is so. But suppose you had a friend up here who lured you this good stout rope which I see in the corner. Then I think, if you were an active man, you might swarm up, wooden leg and all. You would depart, of course, in the same fashion, and your ally would draw up the rope, shut the window, snip it on the inside, and get away in the way that he originally came. As a minor point, it may be noted," he continued, fingering the rope, "that our wooden-legged friend, though a fair climber, was not a professional sailor. His hands were far from horny. My lens discloses more than one blood mark, especially towards the end of the rope, from which I gather that he slipped down with such velocity that he took the skin off his hands." "Oh, that is all very well," said I, "but how about this mysterious ally? How came he into the room?" "You will not apply my precept," he said, shaking his head. "How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth?" "He came through the hole in the roof," I cried. "Of course he did. If you will have the kindness to hold the lamp for me, we shall now extend our searches to the room above, the secret room in which the treasure was found." He mounted the steps, and seizing a rafter with either hand, he swung himself up into the garret. Then, lying on his face, he reached down for the lamp, and held it while I followed him. The chamber in which we found ourselves was about 10 feet one way and 6 the other. There was no furniture of any sort, and the accumulated dust of years lay thick upon the floor. "Here you are, you see," said Sherlock Holmes, putting his hand against the sloping wall. "This is a trapdoor which leads out onto the roof. This, then, is the way by which number 1 entered. Let us see if we can find some other traces of his individuality." He held down the lamp to the floor, and as he did so I saw for the second time that night a startled, surprised look come over his face. The floor was covered thickly with the prints of a naked foot, clear, well-defined, perfectly formed. but scarce half the size of those of an ordinary man. "Holmes," I said, "a child has done this terrible thing." He had recovered his self-possession in an instant. "I was staggered for the moment," he said, "but the thing is quite natural. There is nothing more to be learned here. Let us go down." When we had regained the lower room once more, he whipped out his lens and a tape measure and hurried about the room on his knees. He kept muttering to himself, and finally he broke out into a loud cry of delight. "Ah, we are certainly in luck," said he. "We ought to have very little trouble now. Number 1 has had the misfortune to tread in the creosote. The carboy has been cracked, you see, and the stuff has leaked out." "What then?" I asked. "Why, we've got him, that's all," said he. "I know a dog that would follow that scent to the world's end." "Ah, but hello, here are the accredited representatives of the law." Heavy steps and the clamour of loud voices were audible from below. "Before they come," said Holmes, "just put your hand on this poor fellow's arm, and here on his leg. What do you feel?" "The muscles are as hard as a board," I answered. "Quite so. They are in a state of extreme contraction. What conclusion would it suggest to your mind?" "Death from some powerful vegetable alkaloid," I answered. "Some strychnine-like substance, which would produce tetanus." That was the idea that occurred to me the instant I saw the drawn muscles of the face. As you saw, I discovered a thorn which had been driven or shot with no great force into the scalp. You observed that the part struck was that which would be turned towards the hole in the ceiling if the man were erect in the chair. Now examine the thorn. I took it up gingerly and held it in the light of the lantern. It was long, sharp, and black, with a glazed look near the point, as though some gummy substance had dried upon it. "Is that an English thorn?" Holmes asked. "No, it certainly is not." With all these data, you should be able to draw some just inference." But here are the regulars, so the auxiliary forces may beat a retreat." As he spoke, a very stout, portly man in a grey suit strode heavily into the room. He was closely followed by an inspector in uniform and by Mr. Thaddeus Sholto.
"Here's a business,"
he cried, in a muffled, husky voice.
But who are all these?"
"I think you must recollect me, Mr. Athelney Jones," said Holmes quietly.
"Huh? Why, of course I do,"
he wheezed.
"Oh, it's Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the theorist. Oh, what is all this? Stern facts here, no room for theories. How lucky that I happen to be out at Norwood over another case. Now, what do you think the man died of?"
"Oh, this is hardly a case for me to theorize over," said Holmes dryly.
No. Still, we can't deny that you hit the nail on the head sometimes. Door locked, I understand. Jewels worth $500,000 missing? How was the window?"
"Fastened. But there are steps on the sill."
I have a theory. What do you think of this, Holmes? Sholto was on his own confession with his brother last night. The brother died in a fit, on which Sholto walked off with the treasure. How's that?"
On which the dead man very conveniently got up and locked the door on the inside.
There's a flaw there. Let us apply common sense to the matter. This Thaddeus Sholto was with his brother. There was a quarrel, so much we know. The brother is dead, the jewels are gone, so much we also know. No one saw the brother from the time Thaddeus left him. You see, I am weaving my web round Thaddeus. The net begins to close about him."
"You are not quite in possession of the facts yet," said Holmes. "This splinter of wood, which I have every reason to believe to be poisoned, was in the man's scalp. This card, inscribed as you see it, was on the table, and beside it lay this rather curious stone-headed instrument. Now, how does all that fit into your theory?"
Oh, confirms it in every respect. House is full of Indian curiosities. The only question is, how did Thaddeus depart? Ah, of course, here's a hole in the roof.
With great activity, considering his bulk, he sprang up the steps and squeezed through into the garret, and immediately afterwards we heard his exulting voice proclaiming that he had found the trapdoor.
"Ah, see," said Athelney Jones, reappearing down the steps again. "Facts are better than theories after all. My view of the case is confirmed. There is a trapdoor communicating with the roof, and it is partly open."
It was I who opened it.
Oh, indeed. Yes, well, whoever noticed it, it shows how our gentleman got away. Inspector.
"Yes, sir," from the passage.
"Ask Mr. Sholto to step this way. Mr. Sholto, it is my duty to inform you that anything which you may say will be used against you. I arrest you in the Queen's name as being concerned in the death of your brother."
"There now, didn't I tell you?"
cried the poor little man. "Don't trouble yourself about it, Mr. Sholto," said Holmes. "I think that I can engage to clear you of the charge."
"Don't promise him too much, Mr. Theorist,"
snapped the detective. "Not only will I clear him, Mr. Jones, but I will make you a free present of the name and description of one of the two people who were in this room last night. His name, I have every reason to believe, is Jonathan Small. He is a poorly educated man, small, active, with his right leg off, and wearing a wooden stump. He is a middle-aged man, much sunburnt, and has been a convict. The other man—"
"Oh, the other man?"
asked Athelney Jones in a sneering voice. "Is a rather curious person," said Sherlock Holmes, turning upon his heel. "A word with you, Watson." He led me out to the head of the stair. "This unexpected occurrence," he said, "has caused us rather to lose sight of the original purpose of our journey." "I have just been thinking so," I answered. "It is not right that Miss Morstan should remain in this stricken house. No, you must escort her home. I will wait for you here, if you will drive out again. Or perhaps you're too tired?" "Oh, by no means. I should like to see the matter through with you." "Your presence will be of great service to me," he answered. "When you have dropped Miss Morstan, I wish you to go on to number 3 Pinchin Lane, down near the water's edge at Lambeth. Sherman is the name. Knock old Sherman up and tell him with my compliments that I want Toby at once, and you will bring Toby back in the cab with you." "A dog, I suppose?" "Yes, a queer mongrel with a most amazing power of scent." "I shall bring him then," said I. It is 1 now. I ought to be back before 3. "And I," said Holmes, "shall study the great Jones's methods." The police had brought a cab with them, and in this I escorted Miss Morstan back to her home. She has told me since that she thought me cold and distant upon that journey. She little guessed the struggle within my breast. She was weak and helpless, shaken in mind and nerve. It was to take her at a disadvantage to obtrude love upon her at such a time. Worse still, she was rich. Was it honourable that a half-pay surgeon should take such advantage of an intimacy which chance had brought about? It was nearly 2 o'clock when we reached Mrs. Cecil Forrester's. She opened the door herself, and it gave me joy to see how tenderly her arm stole round the other's waist, and how motherly was the voice in which she greeted her. She was clearly no mere paid dependent, but an honoured friend. I explained the importance of my errand, and promised faithfully to call and report any progress which we might make with the case. Pinchin Lane was a row of shabby 2-storied houses in the lower quarter of Lambeth. I had to knock for some time at number 3 before I could make any impression. At last, a face looked out at the upper window. "Go on, you drunken vagabond," said the face. I want a dog," I cried. "Now stand clear," shouted Mr. Sherman. "Or, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," I began. The words had a most magical effect, for within a minute the door was unbarred and open. Mr. Sherman was a lean, lanky old man. "Oh, a friend of Mr. Sherlock Holmes is always welcome," said he. "Step in, sir. What was it that Mr. Sherlock Holmes wanted, sir?" He wanted a dog of yours.
Oh, that'd be Toby.
Yes, Toby was the name. Toby proved to be an ugly, long-haired, lop-eared creature, half spaniel and half lurcher, brown and white, with a very clumsy, waddling gait. It accepted after some hesitation a lump of sugar which the old man handed to me, and having thus sealed an alliance, it followed me to the cab, and made no difficulties about accompanying me. It had just struck 3 on the palace clock when I found myself back once more at Pondicherry Lodge. Holmes was standing on the doorstep with his hands in his pockets, smoking his pipe.
"Ah, you have him there," said he. "Good dog, then." Athelney Jones is gone. He has arrested not only friend Thaddeus, but the gatekeeper, the housekeeper, and the Indian servant. We have the place to ourselves, but for a sergeant upstairs. Leave the dog here and come up."
We tied Toby to the hall table and reascended the stairs. The room was as we had left it, save that a sheet had been draped over the central figure.
"Now, I must kick off my boots and stockings. Just carry them down with you, Watson. I'm going to do a little climbing. And dip my handkerchief into the creosote. Now, come up into the garret with me for a moment."
We clambered up through the hole. Holmes turned his light once more upon the footsteps in the dust.
Do you observe anything noteworthy about them?"
"They belong," I said, "to a child or a small woman."
"Is there anything else?"
They appear to be much as other footmarks."
"Not at all. Look here. This is the print of a right foot in the dust. Now I make one with my naked foot beside it. What is the chief difference?"
"Your toes are all cramped together. The other print has each toe distinctly divided."
"Quite so. Now bear that in mind. Now, would you kindly step over to that flap window and smell the edge of the woodwork? I shall stay over here, as I have this handkerchief in my hand."
I did as he directed, and was instantly conscious of a strong, tarry smell.
"That is where he put his foot in getting out. If you can trace him, I should think that Toby will have no difficulty. Now run downstairs and loose the dog."
By the time that I got out into the grounds, Sherlock Holmes was on the roof, crawling very slowly along the ridge. I lost sight of him behind a stack of chimneys, but he presently reappeared and then vanished once more upon the opposite side. When I made my way round there, I found him seated at one of the corner eaves.
"That you, Watson?" he cried.
Yes.
"This is the place. What is that black thing down there?"
A water barrel."
"Top on it?"
"Yes."
"No sign of a ladder?"
"No."
Confound the fellow. It's a most breakneck place. Here goes, anyhow."
There was a scuffling of feet, and then, with a light spring, he came onto the barrel, and from there to the earth.
It was easy to follow him, and in his hurry he dropped this.
The object which he held up to me was a small pocket, or pouch, woven out of coloured grasses, and with a few tawdry beads strung round it. Inside were 6 spines of dark wood, sharp at one end and rounded at the other, like that which had struck Bartholomew Sholto.
"Those are hellish things," said Holmes, drawing on his stockings and boots. "Look out that you don't prick yourself. Well, you game for a 6-mile trudge, Watson?"
"Certainly," I answered.
"Here you are, doggy. Good old Toby. Smell it, Toby. Smell it."
He pushed the creosote handkerchief under the dog's nose. He then threw the handkerchief to a distance, fastened a stout cord to the mongrel's collar, and led him to the foot of the water barrel. The creature instantly broke into a succession of high, tremulous yelps, and with his nose on the ground pattered off at a pace which strained his leash and kept us at the top of our speed.
"The scent," said Holmes, "will lie up on the road in spite of their 28 hours' start."
I confess that I had my doubts when I reflected upon the great traffic which had passed along the London road, but Toby never hesitated.
"Do not imagine," said Holmes, "that I depend for my success in this case upon the mere chance of one of these fellows having put his foot in the chemical. I have knowledge now which would enable me to trace them in many different ways. This, however, is the readiest, and since fortune has put it into our hands, I should be culpable if I neglected it. It has, however, prevented the case from becoming the pretty little intellectual problem which it at one time promised to be. There might have been some credit to be gained out of it, but for this too palpable clue.
There is credit and to spare, said I. I assure you, Holmes, that I marvel at the means by which you obtain your results in this case. How, for example, could you describe with such confidence the wooden-legged man?
Oh, my dear boy, it was simplicity itself. Two officers, who are in command of a convict guard, learn an important secret as to buried treasure. A map is drawn for them by an Englishman named Jonathan Small. Now, you remember that we saw the name upon the chart in Captain Morstan's possession. He had signed it in behalf of himself and his associates, the sign of the Four, as he somewhat dramatically called it.
Aided by this chart, the officers, or one of them, gets the treasure and brings it to England. Now then, why did not Jonathan Small get the treasure himself? Well, the answer is obvious. The chart is dated at a time when Morstan was brought into close association with convicts. Jonathan Small did not get the treasure because he and his associates were themselves convicts and could not get away.
Oh, but this is mere speculation, said I.
It is more than that. It is the only hypothesis which covers the facts. Major Sholto remains at peace for some years, happy in the possession of his treasure. Then he receives a letter from India which gives him a great fright. What was that?
A letter to say that the men whom he had wronged had been set free.
Or had escaped. Now what does he do then? He guards himself against a wooden-legged man. A white man, mark you, for he mistakes a white tradesman for him and actually fires a pistol at him. Now, only one white man's name is on the chart. The others are Hindus or Mohammedans. Therefore, we may say with confidence that the wooden-legged man is identical with Jonathan Small. Does the reasoning strike you as being faulty?
No, it is clear and concise.
Well now, let us put ourselves in the place of Jonathan Small. He found out where Sholto lived, and very possibly he established communications with someone inside the house. There is this butler, Lal Rao, whom we have not seen. Then comes the discovery of the garret, and he is instantly informed of it. Jonathan, with his wooden leg, is utterly unable to reach the lofty room of Bartholomew Sholto. He takes with him, however, a rather curious associate, who gets over this difficulty, but dips his naked foot into creosote.
But it was the associate, and not Jonathan, who committed the crime.
Quite so. And rather to Jonathan's disgust, to judge by the way he stamped about when he got into the room. As to his personal appearance, he must be middle-aged and must be sunburnt after serving his time in such an oven as the Andamans. His hairiness was the one point which impressed itself upon Thaddeus Sholto when he saw him at the window.
The associate?
Ah, well, there is no great mystery there. But you will know all about it soon enough. You have a pistol, have you not?
I have my stick.
It is just possible that we may need something of the sort if we get to their lair. Jonathan I shall leave to you. But if the other turns nasty, I shall shoot him dead.
He took out his revolver as he spoke, and having loaded 2 of the chambers, he put it back into the right-hand pocket of his jacket. We had traversed Streatham, Brixton, Camberwell, and now found ourselves in Kennington Lane, having borne away through the side streets to the east of the Oval. This trail tended down towards the riverside. At the end of Broad Street, it ran right down to the water's edge, where there was a small wooden wharf. Toby led us to the very edge of this and stood there whining, looking out on the dark current beyond.
We're out of luck," said Holmes. "They have taken a boat here." Close to the rude landing stage was a small brick house, with a wooden placard slung out through the second window. Mordecai Smith was printed across it in large letters, and underneath, boats to hire by the hour or day. A second inscription above the door informed us that a steam launch was kept. This looks bad," said Holmes. "These fellows are sharper than I expected. They seem to have covered their tracks." He was approaching the door of the house when it opened, and a little lad of 6 came running out, followed by a stoutish red-faced woman with a large sponge in her hand. "You come back here and be washed, Jack," she shouted. "If your father comes home and finds you like that, he'll let us hear of it." "Oh, away, is he?" said Holmes in a disappointed voice. "I'm sorry for that, for I wanted to speak to Mr. Smith." "Oh, he's been away since yesterday morning, sir. And truth to tell, I'm beginning to feel frightened about him." "Well, I wanted to hire his steam launch." "Oh, why, bless you, sir, it's in the steam launch he's gone. That's what puzzles me, for I know there ain't more coals in her than would take to about Woolwich and back. What good is a steam launch without coals?" "Well, he might have bought some at a wharf down the river." "Oh, he might, sir, but it weren't his way. Besides, I don't like that wooden-legged man, with his ugly face and his outlandish talk." "A wooden-legged man?" said Holmes, with bland surprise. "Yes, sir. It was him that roused my old man up yesterday night. And what's more, my man knew he was coming, for he had steam up on the launch." "Well, how could you possibly tell that it was the wooden-legged man who came in the night?" "Oh, his voice, sir. I knew his voice, which is kind of thick and foggy." "And was this wooden-legged man alone?" "I couldn't say, I'm sure, sir. I didn't hear no one else." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, for I wanted a steam launch, and I've heard good reports of the, let me see, what is her name?" "Oh, the Aurora, sir." "Ah, yes. She's not that old green launch with a yellow line, very broad in the beam." "Oh, no, indeed, no. She's as trim a little thing as anything on the river. She's been fresh painted, black, with 2 red streaks." "Ah, thanks. I hope that you'll hear soon from Mr. Smith. I am going down the river, and if I should see anything of the Aurora, I shall let him know that you're uneasy. A black funnel, did you say?" "Oh, no, sir, no. Black with a white band." "Ah, of course, yes. Good morning, Mrs. Smith. There's a boatman with a wherry, Watson. We shall take it and cross the river." "Our course now seems pretty clear," said I. "What would you do, then?" "Well, I would engage a launch and go down the river on the track of the Aurora." "Oh, my dear fellow, it would be a colossal task." "Employ the police, then." No, I shall probably call Athelney Jones in at the last moment. I have a fancy for working it out myself, now that we have gone so far." "Well, what are we to do, then?" I asked, as we landed near Millbank Penitentiary. "Take this hansom, drive home, have some breakfast, and get an hour's sleep. It's quite on the cards that we may be afoot tonight again. Stop at a telegraph office, cabby. We'll keep Toby. He may be of further use." We pulled up at the Great Peter Street post office, and Holmes dispatched his wire. "Who do you think that is to?" he asked, as we resumed our journey. "Why, I'm sure I don't know." "It was to my dirty little Lieutenant Wiggins, and I expect that he and his gang will be with us before we have finished our breakfast." It was between 8 and 9 o'clock now, and I was limp and weary, befogged in mind and fatigued in body. A bath at Baker Street and a complete change freshened me up wonderfully. When I came down to our room, I found the breakfast laid and Holmes pouring out the coffee. "Ha! Here it is," said he, and pointed to an open newspaper. "The energetic Jones and the ubiquitous reporter have fixed it up between them." I took the paper from him and read the short notice, which was headed, "Mysterious Business at Upper Norwood." "About 12 o'clock last night," said the Standard, "Mr. Bartholomew Sholto, of Pondicherry Lodge, Upper Norwood, was found dead in his room under circumstances which point to foul play. As far as we can learn, No actual traces of violence were found upon Mr. Sholto's person, but a valuable collection of Indian gems which the deceased gentleman had inherited from his father has been carried off. The discovery was first made by Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, who had called at the house with Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, brother of the deceased. By a singular piece of good fortune, Mr. Athelney Jones, the well-known member of the detective police force, happened to be at the Norwood police station, and was on the ground within half an hour of the first alarm. Thaddeus Sholto has already been arrested, together with the housekeeper, Mrs. Burnstone, an Indian butler named Lal Rao, and a porter or gatekeeper named McMurdo.
"Isn't it gorgeous?" said Holmes over his coffee cup. What do you think of it?
Well, I think that we've had a close shave ourselves of being arrested for the crime.
So do I.
At this moment there was a loud ring at the bell.
"Ah, it is the Baker Street irregulars," said Holmes.
As he spoke, in rushed a dozen dirty and ragged little street Arabs. One of their number, taller and older than the others, stood forward.
"Got your message, sir," he said, "and brought them on sharp. Free bob and a tanner for tickets."
"Here you are," said Holmes, producing some silver.
"In future they can report to you, Wiggins, and you to me. I want to find the whereabouts of a steam launch called the Aurora. Owner Mordecai Smith, black with 2 red streaks, funnel black with a white band. She's down the river somewhere. Let me know the moment you have news. Is that all clear?" "Yes, Governor," said Wiggins. "The old scale of pay and a guinea to the boy who finds the boat. And here's a day in advance. Now, off you go." "If the launch is above water, they will find her," said Holmes. "In the meantime, we can do nothing but await results."
"All right. Are you going to bed, Holmes?"
No, I'm not tired. I'm going to smoke and to think over this queer business to which my fair client has introduced us. If ever man had an easy task, this of ours ought to be. Wooden-legged men are not so common, but the other man must, I should think, be absolutely unique."
That other man again.
"Well, you must have formed your own opinion. Now, do consider the data. Diminutive footmarks, toes never fettered by boots, naked feet, stone-headed wooden mace, great agility, small poisoned darts. Now, what do you make of all this?"
"A savage!" I exclaimed. Perhaps one of those Indians who were the associates of Jonathan Small."
"Oh, hardly that," said he. "These little darts could only be shot in one way. They are from a blowpipe. Now then, where are we to find our savage?"
South America," I hazarded. He stretched his hand up and took down a bulky volume from the shelf.
Andaman Islands, situated 340 miles to the north of Sumatra, in the Bay of Bengal. The aborigines of the Andaman Islands may perhaps claim the distinction of being the smallest race upon this earth. The average height is rather below 4 feet. They are a fierce, morose people, though capable of forming most devoted friendships. They are naturally hideous, having large, misshapen heads. Their feet and hands, however, are remarkably small. They have always been a terror to shipwrecked crews, braining the survivors with their stone-headed clubs, or shooting them with their poisoned arrows. Nice, amiable people, Watson. I fancy that Jonathan Small would have given a good deal not to have employed him."
"But how came he to have so singular a companion?"
"No doubt we shall know all about it in time. Look here, Watson, you look regularly done. Lie down here on the sofa and see if I can put you to sleep."
He took up his violin from the corner, and as I stretched myself out, he began to play some melodious air. I seemed to be floating away, with the sweet face of Mary Morstan looking down upon me. It was late in the afternoon before I woke, strengthened and refreshed. Sherlock Holmes looked across at me as I stirred, and I noticed that his face was dark and troubled. "Oh, have you had fresh news, then?"
Unfortunately, no. Wiggins has just been up to report. He says that no trace can be found of the launch.
Can I do anything?
No. We can do nothing. We can only wait.
Then I shall run over to Camberwell and call upon Mrs. Cecil Forrester.
On Mrs. Cecil Forrester?
Asked Holmes with the twinkle of a smile in his eyes.
Well, of course, on Miss Morstan too.
I would not tell them too much, said Holmes. Women are never to be entirely trusted. Not even the best of them.
I did not pause to argue over this atrocious sentiment.
I say, if you're crossing the river, you may as well return Toby.
I took our mongrel accordingly, and left him, together with a half-sovereign, at the old naturalist's in Pinchin Lane. At Camberwell, I found Miss Morstan a little weary after her night's adventures, but very eager to hear the news. Mrs. Forrester, too, was full of curiosity. I told them all we had done.
"Why, Mary," said Mrs. Forrester, "I don't think you're nearly excited enough. Just imagine what it must be to be so rich and have the world at your feet."
It sent a little thrill of joy to my heart to notice that she showed no sign of elation at the prospect. "It is for Mr. Thaddeus Sholto that I am anxious," she said. "It is our duty to clear him of this dreadful and unfounded charge." It was evening before I left Camberwell, and quite dark by the time I reached home. My companion's book and pipe lay by his chair, but he had disappeared. "I suppose that Mr. Sherlock Holmes has gone out," I said to Mrs. Hudson as she came up to lower the blinds.
"No, sir, he's gone to his room."
"I hope he's not going to be ill, sir." "I don't think you have any cause to be uneasy, Mrs. Hudson," said I. "He has some small matter upon his mind which makes him restless." At breakfast time he looked worn and haggard, with a little fleck of feverish colour upon each cheek. "Oh, you're knocking yourself up, old man," I remarked. "I heard you marching about in the night." "I could not sleep," said he. "This infernal problem is consuming me. Surely we shall hear something." We did not, however. I went to Camberwell in the evening to report our ill success to the ladies, and on my return I found Holmes dejected and somewhat morose. He busied himself all evening in an abstruse chemical analysis, and up to the small hours of the morning I could hear the clink of test tubes. In the early dawn I woke with a start, and was surprised to find him standing by my bedside, clad in a rude sailor dress, with a pea-jacket and a coarse red scarf round his neck. "I'm off down the river, Watson," said he.
Surely I can come with you then?"
"No, you can be much more useful if you'll remain here as my representative. I want you to open all notes and telegrams, and act on your own judgment if any news should come. Can I rely upon you?"
"Well, most certainly, yes."
"I shall have news of some sort or other before I get back." I had heard nothing from him by breakfast time. On opening the Standard, however, I found that there was a fresh allusion to the business. "With reference to the Upper Norwood tragedy," it remarked, "fresh evidence has shown that it is quite impossible that Mr. Thaddeus Sholto could have been in any way concerned in the matter. He and the housekeeper, Mrs. Bernstone, were both released yesterday evening." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon there was a loud peal at the bell, an authoritative voice in the hall, and to my surprise no less a person than Mr. Athelney Jones was shown up to me. His expression was downcast, and his bearing meek and even apologetic.
"Good day, sir. Good day," said he. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes is out, I understand."
"Yes, but perhaps you would care to wait. Take that chair and try one of these cigars."
Thank you. I don't mind if I do. You know my theory about this Norwood case?"
"I remember that you expressed one."
Well, I've been obliged to reconsider it. Mr. Sholto was able to prove an alibi that could not be shaken. a very dark case. My professional credit is at stake. I should be very glad of a little assistance."
"We all need help sometimes," said I.
"Your friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, is a wonderful man, sir," said he. "I had a wire from him this morning, by which I understand that he has got some clue to this Sholto business. Here is his message."
"Go to Baker Street at once," it said. "If I have not returned, wait for me. I am close on the track of the Sholto gang. You can come with us tonight if you want to be in at the finish." "Ah, well, this sounds well. He's evidently picked up the scent again," said I.
"Ah, then he's been at fault too," exclaimed Jones with evident satisfaction. "But there is someone at the door. Perhaps it's he."
A heavy step was heard ascending the stair, with a great wheezing and rattling as from a man who was sorely put to it for breath. His appearance corresponded to the sounds which we had heard. He was an aged man, clad in seafaring garb, with an old pea-jacket buttoned up to his throat. I could see little of his face save a pair of keen dark eyes, overhung by bushy white brows and long grey side whiskers. "What is it, my man?" I asked.
Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes here?" said he.
"No, but I am acting for him. You can tell me any message you have for him."
"Well, it was to himself I was to tell it," said he.
"Yeah, but I tell you that I am acting for him. Was it about Mordecai Smith's boat?"
Yes. I knows well where it is, and I knows where the men is after are, and I knows where the treasure is. I knows all about it."
"Well, then tell me, and I shall let him know."
It was to him I was to tell it,"
he repeated. "Well, then you must wait for him."
No, I don't care about the look of either of you, and I won't tell a word."
He shuffled towards the door, but Athelney Jones got in front of him.
"Wait a bit, my friend," said he. "You have important information, and you must not walk off. We shall keep you, whether you like it or not, until our friend returns." "Ow! Pretty sort of treatment, this," he cried. "We shall recompense you for the loss of your time. Sit over here on the sofa, and you will not have long to wait."
He came across sullenly enough, and seated himself with his face resting on his hands. Jones and I resumed our cigars and our talk. Suddenly, however, Holmes's voice broke in upon us. "Well, I think that you might offer me a cigar too," he said. We both started in our chairs. There was Holmes sitting close to us, with an air of quiet amusement. "Holmes!" I exclaimed. "You here, but where is the old man?" "Here is the old man," said he, holding out a heap of white hair.
"Oh, you rogue!" cried Jones, highly delighted.
You got my wire?" asked Holmes.
"Yes, that was what brought me here."
"And how has your case prospered?"
"Oh, it's all come to nothing. I've had to release 2 of my prisoners, and there is no evidence against the other 2.
"Never mind. We shall give you 2 others in the place of them. But you must put yourself under my orders. You are welcome to all the official credit, but you must act on the lines that I point out. Is that agreed?"
Oh, entirely. If you will help me to the men."
Well then, in the first place, I shall want a fast police boat, a steam launch, to be at Westminster Stairs at 7 o'clock.
"Oh, that is easily managed."
Then I shall want 2 staunch men in case of resistance.
"Oh, there'll be 2 or 3 in the boat. What else?"
When we secure the men, we shall get the treasure. I think that it would be a pleasure to my friend here to take the box round to the young lady to whom half of it rightly belongs. Let her be the first to open it. Eh, Watson?" Well, it would be a great pleasure to me.
Rather an irregular procedure, said Jones, shaking his head. However, I suppose we must wink at it. The treasure must afterwards be handed over to the authorities until after the official investigation.
Certainly. One other point. I should much like to have a few details about this matter from the lips of Jonathan Small himself.
Well, if you can catch him, I don't see how I can refuse you an interview with him.
That is understood, then?
Perfectly. Is there anything else?
Only that I insist upon your dining with us. Our meal was a merry one. Holmes could talk exceedingly well when he chose, and Athelney Jones proved to be a sociable soul in his hours of relaxation. For myself, I felt elated at the thought that we were nearing the end of our task. When the cloth was cleared, Holmes glanced at his watch and filled up 3 glasses with port. "1 bumper," said he, "to the success of our little expedition. And now it's time we were off. Have you a pistol, Watson?"
I have my old service revolver in my desk.
You'd best take it, then. It's well to be prepared.
It was a little past 7 before we reached the Westminster Wharf and found our launch awaiting us.
Holmes eyed it critically. "Is there anything to mark it as a police boat?"
Yes, that green lamp at the side.
"Then take it off."
Small change was made.
Oh? Where to?
Asked Jones.
"To the Tower. Tell them to stop opposite to Jacobson's yard."
Our craft was evidently a very fast one. We shot past the long line of loaded barges as though they were stationary.
Holmes smiled with satisfaction. "We ought to be able to catch anything on the river," he said.
Well, hardly that, but there are not many launches to beat us.
Oh, we shall have to catch the Aurora, and she has a name for being a clipper. I will tell you how the land lies, Watson. My boys had been up the river and down the river without result. The launch was not at any landing stage or wharf, nor had it returned. Yet it could hardly have been scuttled to hide their traces. So I put myself in the place of Jonathan Small and looked at it as a man of his capacity would. How could he conceal the launch and yet have her at hand when wanted? I could only think of one way of doing it. I might hand the launch over to some boat-builder or repairer, with directions to make a trifling change in her. She would then be removed to his shed or yard. She would be effectively concealed, while at the same time I could have her at a few hours' notice.
Yes, that seems simple enough.
It is just these very simple things which are extremely likely to be overlooked. However, I determined to act on the idea. I started at once in this harmless seaman's rig, and inquired at all the yards down the river. I drew blank at 15, but at the 16th, Jacobson's, I learnt that the Aurora had been handed over to them 2 days ago by a wooden-legged man, with some trivial direction as to her rudder. "There ain't naught amiss with her rudder," said the foreman. "There she lies with the red streaks." And at that moment who should come down but Mordecai Smith, the missing owner. He was rather the worse for liquor. I should not, of course, have known him, but he bellowed out his name and the name of his launch. "I want her tonight at 8 o'clock, said he. "I have 2 gentlemen who won't be kept waiting." Happening to pick up one of my boys, I stationed him as a sentry over the launch. He's to stand at the water's edge and wave his handkerchief to us when they start. We shall be lying off in the stream, and it'll be a strange thing if we do not take men, treasure, and all.
While this conversation had been proceeding, we'd been shooting the long series of bridges which span the Thames. It was twilight before we reached the Tower.
"That is Jacobson's yard,"
said Holmes, pointing to a bristle of masts and rigging on the Surrey side. He took a pair of night glasses from his pocket.
"I see my sentry at his post," he remarked.
Suppose we go downstream a short way and lie in wait for them,
said Jones.
From this point we can see the entrance of the yard. We must stay where we are. But do I see a handkerchief? Surely there is a white flutter over yonder."
"Yes, it's your boy," I cried. "I can see him plainly."
"And there's the Aurora," exclaimed Holmes, "and going like the devil."
Aurora had slipped unseen through the yard entrance and was flying down the stream near into the shore, going at a tremendous rate.
"She's very fast," said Jones. "I doubt if we shall catch her."
"We must catch her," cried Holmes. With every throb of the engine, we sprang and quivered like a living thing. Right ahead, a dark blur upon the water showed where the Aurora lay, and the swirl of white foam behind her spoke of the pace at which she was going.
"I think we gain a little,"
said Jones.
"I'm sure of it," said I.
Jones turned our searchlight upon her so that we could plainly see the figures upon her deck. They may have had some doubt at first as to whether we were really pursuing them, but now, as we followed every winding and turning which they took, there could no longer be any question about it. Nearer we came and nearer. Jones yelled to them to stop. We were not more than 4 boat lengths behind them, both boats flying at a tremendous pace. At our hail, the man in the stern sprang up from the deck and shook his 2 clenched fists at us, cursing the while in a high, cracked voice. As he stood poising himself with legs astride, I could see that from the thigh downward there was but a wooden stump upon the right side. At the sound of his strident, angry cries, there was a movement in the huddled bundle upon the deck. It straightened itself into a little black man with a great misshapen head. Holmes had already drawn his revolver, and I whipped out mine at the sight of this savage, distorted figure. "Fire if he raises his hand," said Holmes. It was well that we had so clear a view of him. Even as we looked, he plucked out from his covering a short, round piece of wood and clapped it to his lips. Our pistols rang out together. He whirled, threw up his arms, and with a kind of choking cough fell sideways into the stream. At the same moment the wooden-legged man threw himself upon the rudder and put it hard down, so that his boat made straight in for the southern bank. We were round after her in an instant. The launch, with a dull thud, ran up upon the mud-bank. The fugitive sprang out, but his stump instantly sank its whole length into the sodden soil. In vain he struggled and writhed. When we brought our launch alongside, he was so firmly anchored that it was only by throwing the end of a rope over his shoulders that we were able to haul him out and to drag him like some evil fish over our side. Mordecai Smith sat sullenly in his launch, but came aboard meekly enough when commanded. The Aurora herself we hauled off and made fast to our stern. A solid iron chest of Indian workmanship stood upon the deck. There was no key, but it was of considerable weight, so we transferred it carefully to our own little cabin. As we steamed slowly upstream again, we flashed our searchlight in every direction, but there was no sign of the islander. "See here," said Holmes, pointing to the wooden hatchway. We were hardly quick enough with our pistols. There, sure enough, just behind where we'd been standing, stuck one of those murderous darts which we knew so well. Our captive sat in the cabin, opposite to the iron box which he had waited so long to gain. It seemed to me that there was more sorrow than anger in his rigid and contained countenance. "Well, Jonathan Small," said Holmes, lighting a cigar, "I am sorry that it has come to this." "And so am I, sir," he answered frankly. "I don't believe that I can swing over the job. I give you my word on the book that I never raised hand against Mr. Sholto. 'Twas that little hellhound Tonga who shot one of his cursed darts into him. I had no part in it, sir." "Have a cigar," said Holmes, "and you had best take a pull out of my flask, for you're very wet. How could you expect so small and weak a man as this black fellow to overpower Mr. Sholto and hold him while you were climbing the rope?" "Well, the truth is that I hope to find the room clear." "You're under the charge of Mr. Athelney Jones of Scotland Yard. He's going to bring you up to my rooms, and I shall ask you for a true account of the matter. You must make a clean breast of it, for if you do, I hope that I may be of use to you. I think I can prove that the poison acts so quickly that the man was dead before you ever reached the room." "That he was, sir. Oh, it fairly shook me, sir. I'd have half killed Tonga for it if he hadn't scrambled off. That was how he came to leave his club and some of his darts, too, as he tells me, which I dare say helped to put you on our track. It does seem a queer thing," he added, with a bitter smile, "that I, who have a fair claim to 500,000 of money, should spend the first half of my life building a breakwater in the Andamans, and am like to spend the other half digging drains at Dartmoor." At this moment Athelney Jones thrust his broad face and heavy shoulders into the tiny cabin.
"Smith swears he knew nothing of this Norwood business."
"Neither he did," cried our prisoner. "Not a word. I chose his launch because I heard she was a flyer."
"We'll be at Vauxhall Bridge presently," said Jones, "and shall land you, Dr. Watson, with the treasure box. I must, as a matter of duty, send an inspector with you, since you have so valuable a charge. Bring the box back with you to the Baker Street rooms."
They landed me at Vauxhall, and a quarter of an hour's drive brought us to Mrs. Cecil Forrester's. She was out for the evening. Miss Morstan, however, was in the drawing-room. At the sound of my footfall she sprang to her feet, and a bright flush of surprise and of pleasure coloured her pale cheeks. "I heard a cab drive up," she said. "What news have you brought me?" "I have brought you something better than news," said I, putting down the box upon the table. "Is that the treasure, then?" she asked, coolly enough. "Yes, this is the great Agra treasure. Half of it is yours." "If I have it," said she, "I owe it to you." "No, no," I answered, "not to me, but to my friend Sherlock Holmes." "Pray sit down and tell me all about it, Dr. Watson," said she. I narrated briefly what had occurred since I had last seen her. When I spoke of the dart which had so narrowly missed us, she turned so white that I feared she was about to faint. "It is nothing," she said, as I hastened to pour her out some water. I'm all right again. It was a shock to me to hear that I had placed my friends in such horrible peril." "That is all over," I answered. "It was nothing. Let us turn to something brighter. There is the treasure." "What a pretty box," she said, stooping over it. "And so heavy. Where is the key?" "Oh, Small threw it into the Thames," I answered. "I must borrow Mrs. Forrester's poker." The hasp sprang open with a loud snap. With trembling fingers I flung back the lid. We both stood gazing in astonishment. The box was empty. "The treasure is lost," said Miss Morstan calmly. "Thank God!" I ejaculated from my very heart. She looked at me with a quick, questioning smile. "Why do you say that?" she asked. "Because you are within my reach again," I said, taking her hand. She did not withdraw it. "Because I love you, Mary, as truly as ever a man loved a woman. Because this treasure, these riches, sealed my lips. Now that they are gone, I can tell you how I love you. That is why I said, thank God." "Then I say thank God too," she whispered, as I drew her to my side. Whoever had lost a treasure, I knew that night I had gained one. A very patient man was that inspector in the cab, for it was a weary time before I rejoined him. His face clouded over when I showed him the empty box. "It's a bad job," said he. "And so Mr. Athelney Jones will think." His forecast proved to be correct when I got to Baker Street and showed Jones the empty box.
"This is your doing, Small," he said angrily.
"Yes, you'll find the treasure where the key is and where Little Tonga is. When I saw your launch must catch us, I put the loot in a safe place."
"You are deceiving us, Small," said Jones. "If you had wished to throw the treasure into the Thames, it would have been easier for you to have thrown box and all."
"Easier for me to throw and easier for you to recover," he answered. "The man that was clever enough to hunt me down is clever enough to pick an iron box from the bottom of a river. Now that they're scattered over 5 miles or so, it may be a harder job."
"This is a very serious matter, Small," said the detective. "If you had helped justice instead of thwarting it in this way, you would have had a better chance at your trial.
Justice, snarled the ex-convict. Whose loot is this, if it is not ours? Where is the justice that I should give it up to those who have never earned it? You forget that we know nothing of all this, said Holmes quietly. We have not heard your story, and we cannot tell how far justice may have been originally on your side. Well, sir, you've been very fair-spoken to me, though I can see that I have you to thank that I have these bracelets upon my wrists. Still, I bear no grudge for that. If you want to hear my story, I have no wish to hold it back. What I say to you is God's truth, every word of it. When I were about 18, I got into a mess over a girl. I could only get out of it by taking the Queen's shilling and joining the 3rd Buffs, which was just starting for India. I wasn't destined to do much soldiering, however. I was fool enough to go swimming in the Ganges. A crocodile took me just as I was halfway across, and nipped off my right leg as clean as a surgeon could have done it, just above the knee. I was 5 months in hospital over it. When at last I was able to limp out of it with this timbered toe strapped to me stump, I found myself invalided out of the army and unfit for any active occupation. However, my misfortune soon proved to be a blessing in disguise. A man named Abel White, who had come out there as an indigo planter, wanted an overseer to look after his coolies and keep them up to their work. As the work was mostly to be done on horseback, my leg was no great obstacle. The pay was fair, I had comfortable quarters, and altogether I was content to spend the remainder of my life in indigo planting. Well, I was never in luck's way long. Suddenly, without a note of warning, the Great Mutiny broke upon us. Of course, you know all about it, gentlemen. Deal more than I do, very like, since reading's not in my line. At Agra, there were the 3rd Bengal Fusiliers. A volunteer corps of clerks and merchants had been formed, and this I joined, wooden leg and all. The city of Agra is a great place, and our handful of men were lost among the narrow, winding streets. What we did was to organize a central guardhouse in the middle of the fort, and to leave each gate under the charge of 1 white man and 2 or 3 natives. I was selected to take charge during certain hours of the night of a small, isolated door upon the southwest side of the building. 2 Sikh troopers were placed under my command. They were tall, fierce-looking chaps. Mohammed Singh and Abdullah Khan by name, both old fighting men. The 3rd night of my watch was dark and dirty, with a small driving rain. Finding that my companions would not be led into conversation, I took out me pipe and I laid down me musket to strike the match. In an instant, the 2 Sikhs were upon me. One of them snatched my firelock up and levelled it at my head, while the other held a great knife to me throat and swore between his teeth that he would plunge it into me if I moved a step. My first thought was that these fellows were in league with the rebels and that this was the beginning of an assault. The man who held me seemed to know my thoughts, for even as I braced myself to it, he whispered, "Don't make a noise. The fort is safe enough." "Listen to me, Saab," said Abdullah Khan. "You must either be with us now, or you must be silenced forever. The thing is too great a one for us to hesitate. If you will be one of us this night, a quarter of the treasure shall be yours. We can say no fairer." "Well, what is this treasure, then?" I asked. "You will swear to raise no hand and speak no word against us, either now or afterwards?" "I will swear it," I answered. "Then my comrade and I will swear that you shall have a quarter of the treasure, which shall be equally divided among the 4 of us." "There are but 3, said I. "No. Dost Akbar must have his share. Hearken then to what I have to say. There is a Rajah in the northern provinces who has much wealth. When the troubles broke out, he made such plans that, come what might, half at least of his treasure should be left to him. That which was in gold and silver he kept by him in the vaults of his palace, but the most precious stones and the choicest of pearls he had put in an iron box. He sent it by a trusty servant, who, under the guise of a merchant, should bring it to the fort at Agra, there to lie until the land is at peace. This pretended merchant, who travels under the name of Achmet, is now in the city of Agra, and desires to gain his way into the fort. He has with him as travelling companion my foster brother Dost Akbar, who knows his secret. He will come here presently, and here he will find Mohammed Singh and myself awaiting him. What say you to it, Sahib?
I am with you, heart and soul, said I.
It is well, he said,
handing me back my firelock.
We have now only to wait for my brother and the merchant.
Now the rain was still falling steadily. Brown, heavy clouds were drifting across the sky. Suddenly, my eye caught the glint of a shaded lantern at the other side of the moat.
Here they are, I exclaimed.
You will challenge him, Sahib, as usual, whispered Abdullah.
I let the two figures scramble down the sloping bank, splash through the mire, and climb halfway up to the gate before I challenged them.
Who goes there? Said I, in a subdued voice. Friends, came the answer. I uncovered the lantern and threw a flood of light upon them. The first was an enormous Sikh with a black beard, which swept near down to his cummerbund. The other was a little fat round fellow with a great yellow turban and a bundle in his hand. Your protection, Sahib, he panted. Your protection for the unhappy merchant Achmet. What have you in that bundle? I asked. An iron box, he answered, which contains one or two little family matters. Take him to the main guard, said I. The two Sikhs closed in upon him on each side, and the giant walked behind, while they marched through the dark gateway. I could hear the measured tread of their footsteps sounding through the lonely corridors. Suddenly it ceased, and I heard voices and a scuffle, with the sound of blows. You see, gentlemen, I'm keeping my promise. I'm telling you every word of the business, just exactly as it happened. Sherlock Holmes and Jones sat with their hands upon their knees, deeply interested in the story, but with the same disgust written upon their faces. Get on with your story, said Holmes. Well, the box was the same which now lies upon your table. A key hung by a silken cord to that carved handle upon the top. We opened it, and the light of the lantern gleamed upon a collection of gems such as I have read of and thought about. After we'd counted our treasures, we put them back into the chest. Then we solemnly renewed our oath to stand by each other and be true to our secret. We carried the box into the same hall where we buried the body, and there, under certain bricks in the best preserved wall, we made a hollow and put our treasure. We made careful note of the place, and next day I drew 4 plans, one for each of us, and put the sign of the 4 of us at the bottom, for we had sworn that we should each always act for all, so that none might take advantage. Well, there's no use my telling you, gentlemen, what came of the Indian Mutiny. After Wilson took Delhi and Sir Colin relieved Lucknow, the back of the business was broken. Peace seemed to be settling on the country, and we 4 were beginning to hope that the time was at hand when we might safely go off with our shares of the plunder. In a moment, however, our hopes were shattered by our being arrested as the murderers of Achmet. It came about this way. When the Rajah put his jewels into the hands of Achmet, he did it because he knew that he was a trusty man. They're suspicious folk in the East, however, so what does the Rajah do but take a second man, an even more trusty servant, and set him to play the spy upon the first. This second man went after Achmet that night and saw him pass through the doorway. Of course, he thought he'd taken refuge in the fort and applied for admission himself the next day, but could find no trace of Achmet. He spoke about it to a sergeant of guides, who brought it to the ears of the commandant, and a thorough search was made, and the body discovered. We were all 4 seized and brought to trial on a charge of murder. Not a word about the jewels came out of the trial, for the Rajah had been deposed and driven out of India. The 3 Sikhs got penal servitude for life, and I was condemned to death, though my sentence was afterwards commuted to the same as the others. I was changed from Agra to Madras, and from there to Blair Island in the Andamans. There were very few white convicts at this settlement, and I was left pretty much to myself. Among other things, I learnt to dispense drugs for the surgeon, and all the time I was on the lookout for a chance to escape. Now, the surgeon, Dr. Somerton, was a fast, sporting young chap, and the other officers would meet in his rooms of an evening and play cards. Often I could hear their talk and watch their play. There was Major Sholto, Captain Morstan, and Lieutenant Bromley Brown, who were in command of the native troops, and there was the surgeon himself, and 2 or 3 prison officials, crafty old hands, who played a nice, sly, safe game. Major Sholto was the hardest hit. One night I was sitting in my hut when he and Captain Morstan came stumbling along on the way to their quarters. The Major was raving about his losses. "Oh, it's all up, Morstan. I shall have to send in my papers. I'm a ruined man." "Nonsense, old chap," said the other. "I've had a nasty face of myself," but that was all I could hear, but it was enough to set me thinking. A couple of days later, Major Sholto was strolling along the beach, so I took the chance of speaking to him. "I wish to have your advice, Major," said I. "Very well, Small. What is it?" "I wanted to ask you, sir," said I, "who is the proper person to whom hidden treasures should be handed over? I know where 500,000 lies, and as I cannot use it myself, I thought perhaps the best thing that I could do would be to hand it over to the proper authorities, and then perhaps they would get my sentence shortened for me." "500,000, Small?" he gasped. "Oh, quite that, sir, in jewels and pearls. The real owner is outlawed and cannot hold property, so it belongs to the first comer." "Well, let me hear all about it, Small." Well, I told him the story, with small changes, so that he couldn't identify the places. "Well, this is a very important matter, Small," he said. "You must not say a word to anyone about it, and I shall see you again soon." Now, 2 nights later, he and his friend Captain Morstan came to my hut in the dead of night with a lantern. "I want you just to let Captain Morstan hear that story from your own lips, Small." Well, I repeated as I told it before. "Look here, Small," said the Major, "we've been talking it over, my friend here and I, and we have come to the conclusion that this secret of yours is hardly government matter, but is a private concern, which of course you have the power of disposing of as you think best. Now, the question is, what price would you ask for it?" "Why, as to that, gentlemen, I shall want you to help me to my freedom, and to help my 3 companions to theirs. We shall then take you into partnership and give you a 5th share to divide between you." "Oh," said he, "a 5th share? Well, that's not very tempting." "Would it come to 50,000 apiece?" said I. "But how can we gain your freedom?" "Well, the only bar to our escape is that we can get no boat fit for the voyage. There are plenty of little yachts and yawls at Calcutta or Madras. Do you bring one over? We shall engage to get aboard her by night, and if you will drop us on any part of the Indian coast, you will have done your part of the bargain." Well, the matter ended by a second meeting, at which all 4 of us were present. We were to provide both the officers with charts of the part of the Agra fort and mark the place in the wall where the treasure was hid. Major Sholto was to go to India to send out a small yacht provisioned for a voyage, which was to lie off Rutland Island, and to which we were to make our way, and finally to return to his duties. Captain Morstan was then to apply for leave of absence to meet us at Agra, and there to have a final division of the treasure, he taking the Major's share as well as his own. And all this we sealed by the most solemn oaths. Well, gentlemen, I weary you with my long story, so I'll make it as short as I can. The villain Sholto went off to India, but he never came back again. Morstan went over to Agra and found, as we expected, that the treasure was indeed gone. And from then I lived only for vengeance, to escape and to track down Sholto. But 'twas weary years before my time came. One day, when Dr. Somerton was down with a fever, a little Andaman islander was picked up by a convict gang in the woods. He was sick to death, After a couple of months I got him all right and able to walk. He took a kind of fancy to me then. Tonga, for that was his name, was a fine boatman and owned a big roomy canoe of his own. I saw my chance of escape. Now, he was staunch and true, was little Tonga. At that night, named, he had his boat at the wharf. He brought all his earthly possessions with him, his arms and his gods. For 10 days we were beaten about, and on the 11th we were picked up by a trader which was going from Singapore to Jeddah with a cargo of Malay pilgrims. Here and there we drifted all over the world, something always turning up to keep us from London. At last, some 3 or 4 years ago, we found ourselves in England. I had no great difficulty in finding where Sholto lived. I made friends with someone who could help me. I name no names, for I don't want to get anyone else in a hole. And I soon found that he still had the jewels. One day I got word that he was dying. I hurried at once to the garden, and looking through the window I saw him lying on his bed with his sons on each side of him. Even as I looked at him, his jaw dropped, and I knew that he was gone. I got into his room that same night, and I searched his papers to see if there was any record of where he'd hidden the jewels. There was not a line. So I scrawled down the sign of the 4 of us, as it had been on the chart, and I pinned it on his bosom. For some years there was no news to hear, except that they were hunting for the treasure. At last, however, came what we had waited for so long. The treasure had been found. It was up at the top of the house in Mr. Bartholomew Sholto's chemical laboratory. I came at once and had a good look at the place. It seemed to me that I could manage the thing easily through Tonga. As ill luck would have it, Mr. Bartholomew Sholto was still in the room, to his cost. I cursed Tonga for a little bloodthirsty imp. I took the treasure box and let it down, and then slid down myself, having first left the sign of the 4 upon the table, to show that the jewels had come back at last to those who had the most right to them. All this is the truth, and if I tell it to you, gentlemen, it is because I believe the best defence I can make is just to hold nothing back, but let all the world know how badly I have myself been served by Major Sholto, and how innocent I am of the death of his son. A very remarkable account, said Sherlock Holmes.
Well, Holmes, said Athelney Jones, you are a man to be humoured, and I have gone rather far in doing what you and your friend asked me. I shall feel more at ease when we have our storyteller safe under lock and key. The cab still awaits, and there are 2 inspectors downstairs. Of course, you will be wanted at the trial. Good night to you.
Good night, gentlemen, both, said Jonathan Small. Well, and there's an end of our little drama, I remarked, after we had sat some time smoking in silence. I fear that it may be the last investigation in which I shall have the chance of studying your methods. Miss Morstan has done me the honour to accept me as a husband in prospective. Holmes gave a most dismal groan. I feared as much, said he. I really cannot congratulate you. I was a little hurt. Well, have you any reason to be dissatisfied with my choice? I asked. Oh, not at all. I think she's one of the most charming young ladies I ever met, and might have been most useful in such work as we have been doing. She had a decided genius that way. Witness the way in which she preserved that Agra plan from all the other papers of her father. But love is an emotional thing, and whatever is emotional is opposed to that true cold reason which I place above all things. I should never marry myself, lest I bias my judgment. I trust, said I, that my judgment may survive the ordeal. But you look weary. Yes, the reaction is already upon me. I shall be as limp as a rag for a week. Strange, said I, how terms of what in another man I should call laziness alternate with your fits of splendid energy and vigour. Yes, he answered, there are in me the makings of a very fine loafer, and also of a pretty spry sort of fellow. By the way, apropos of this Norwood business, you see that they had, as I surmised, a confederate in the house, who could be none other than Lal Rao, the butler. So Jones actually has the undivided honour of having caught one fish in his great haul.
The division seems rather unfair, I remarked. You have done all the work in this business. I get a wife out of it. Jones gets the credit. Pray, what remains for you?
For me, said Sherlock Holmes, there still remains the cocaine bottle. And he stretched his long white hand up for it.